I sat back in my chair, the leather cool beneath me, staring at the city's skyline through my office window. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the streets of Manhattan, but inside, everything felt deliberately calm, my sanctuary. I adjusted the cuff of my silk blouse, smooth and comforting against my skin, and let my fingers trace the edge of my coffee cup. It was absurdly strong, bitter enough to snap me awake, but somehow it matched the sharp clarity I felt now. Then my phone buzzed, a name I hadn't expected to see for years. Tom Henderson. My old boss. The man who had refused me that raise, who had once dismissed my ideas with a wave of his hand, convinced I would stay small forever. My stomach twisted, a strange mix of irritation and amusement. I let the call go to voicemail, pretending I hadn't noticed, but my mind was already drifting back. I couldn't help the smirk that tugged at the corner of my lips. Years ago, I had left his office quietly, swallowing the sting of rejection like a bitter pill. At the time, it had felt like defeat. Now, with my bank statements as my quiet allies, I held a truth that he couldn't touch. I had built myself up, quietly and deliberately, until I had something he never imagined I could. There was pride in that, yes. And maybe a little irony. The world didn't need to see my triumph. I could enjoy it in private. But part of me wondered what he would feel if he knew that the woman he undervalued now moved money he could only dream of handling. I remember that day as if it were yesterday, though it had been years. I was 28, full of ambition and shaking with nerves as I walked into Tom Henderson's office. My heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing in a silence that felt heavier than the tension in my chest. I had spent weeks preparing, rehearsing every line, every justification for why I deserved a raise. I believed in myself then, maybe more than I ever had. Tom, I wanted to discuss my performance and the possibility of a raise, I said, trying to steady my voice. My hands were slightly clammy, my notebook clutched tightly, the pen in my palm a lifeline. I looked at him, expecting a nod, a spark of recognition for all the late nights, the extra projects, the ideas I had pitched that had actually boosted revenue. He leaned back, arms crossed, and smiled, cold, dismissive. "You're doing fine, Sarah, but I don't see this as the right time," he said, and with a shrug, he dismissed me as if I were a fly buzzing around an important window. The sting was immediate, like ice running down my spine. My throat tightened, my chest constricted, and I could feel the flush of humiliation creeping up my neck. I wanted to argue, to make him see the hours, the sweat, the work, the dedication, but the words stuck in my throat. I left the office that day feeling smaller, like a candle snuffed before it could even burn brightly. On the elevator ride down, I clenched my fists, refusing to cry in front of strangers. That evening, I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea in hand, and she gave me a small, worn notebook. "Write it all down," she said. "Your plans, your goals, your victories. Don't let anyone decide your worth, you do that." Her eyes, warm and steady, met mine, and something inside me shifted. It was the moment I decided I wouldn't wait for permission ever again. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't plead, and I certainly wouldn't let someone else define my value. That notebook became my blueprint, a private manifesto of ambition. And even though I left that office feeling defeated, it was also the day I quietly began building a life where no one could hold me back. After that day in my grandmother's kitchen, everything changed. I carried her words and that little notebook like a secret compass. Every evening, after the office lights dimmed and my colleagues had gone home, I opened it and wrote plans, projections, ideas for ventures that felt impossible. I wanted independence, not revenge, but the thought of proving my worth quietly simmered beneath the surface. I started small. Freelance consulting at first, taking on projects that no one else wanted. I pored over spreadsheets late into the night, learning every nuance of finance, investing, and business strategy. The city hummed outside my apartment window as I sketched budgets, calculated risks, and built plans that felt more real with every page of my notebook. It was during this time that I met Eleanor Price, a seasoned financial advisor with a sharp eye and an even sharper wit. We met at a conference on investment strategies, and I remember feeling nervous as I introduced myself. But she looked at my notebook, saw the detail, the thought, the raw ambition, and she smiled. "You've got something most people don't," she said.
Discipline.
"Vision. Let me help you grow it." That partnership became a turning point. Eleanor taught me the language of high finance, the etiquette of negotiation, and the subtle power of confidence. I absorbed everything, eager to prove that my ideas weren't just dreams. They were actionable plans. The first big win came quietly. A client who had dismissed my proposals earlier suddenly called back, intrigued by a new strategy one had devised. When the contract signed and the funds transferred, I felt a surge of vindication, but I didn't broadcast it. No social media posts, no triumphant emails. This success was mine alone. Night after night, month after month, I compounded small victories. My investments multiplied, my reputation grew in whispers, and my financial independence solidified. I learned to navigate boardrooms, to sit at tables that once felt unreachable. And every step of the way, that notebook remained at my side. A reminder of the day I chose my own worth over someone else's approval. I kept most of this hidden. Friends, even family, assumed I was still navigating the typical career climb, unaware that I had quietly amassed both influence and wealth. Every time I received a notification from my bank about a VIP service upgrade, a new milestone in investments, or a successful deal, I smiled quietly. The world outside thought I was just another ambitious woman, but inside, I was untouchable. And the thought of Tom Henderson, his dismissive smile still etched in my memory, made every quiet triumph taste just a little sweeter. By the time I reached 32, I wasn't just financially independent, I was unshakably confident, with a network of mentors, allies, and clients who believed in my vision. And yet, the world, including those who once underestimated me, still didn't see it. That was my power. The invisible rise, the silent transformation, the unseen proof that no one else could define me. It was a Thursday morning when it happened, completely by accident. I had scheduled a meeting at my private banking office, reviewing some new investment portfolios with Eleanor, when I glanced up and froze. There he was, Tom Henderson, striding through the polished marble lobby, his tailored suit crisp, the same arrogant expression I remembered from years ago. He didn't recognize me immediately. How could he? The confident, composed woman before him was unrecognizable from the timid, pleading employee he had dismissed. I watched quietly as he approached the reception, asking if the VIP client, Sarah Mitchell, was available. My lips curved into a small, knowing smile. It was time. I stepped out from behind my office door, letting the soft click of my heels echo across the floor. The first thing he noticed was the office itself. High ceilings, sleek furnishings, curated art on the walls, and a glass desk that reflected the sunlight like a beacon of achievement. Personal touches, photographs from trips, awards I had quietly earned, a small stack of Eleanor's financial guides, spoke of years of hard work and determination. "Tom," I said, my voice calm, steady, and just warm enough to disarm him. He blinked, confusion flickering across his face as he took in the woman standing before him. "It's been a long time." He opened his mouth, and I let him fumble for words. That hesitation, unearned, surprising, utterly satisfying, was exactly what I wanted. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Please sit. Let me show you something." I pulled up the latest statement on my screen, the numbers crisp and undeniable. Investment accounts, property portfolios, returns he could never have imagined. I explained, without any hint of gloating, that I had built this life on my own terms. No loans from family, no handouts, no permission from bosses who underestimated me. I had turned every setback, every rejection, into fuel. He stared, speechless. The arrogance that once defined him faltered. His eyes widened as he realized the truth. The woman he had dismissed, the one he thought would stay small forever, had quietly become one of his bank's most valuable VIP clients. He had to acknowledge it, but the words caught in his throat. I let the silence linger. Let him take it all in. The art, the elegance, the subtle yet undeniable power radiating from every corner of the office, and from me. Finally, I leaned back in my chair, letting a faint smile play on my lips. "You refused to recognize my worth once," I said softly, "but now, the numbers speak for themselves." Disbelief, awe, a touch of shame, all crossed his face. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tom Henderson, the man who once defined my limitations, was now standing in the presence of my accomplishments. And I had built every piece of this life without him noticing, without his approval, and without asking. I closed the presentation, the final click of the mouse punctuating the moment. He exhaled slowly, defeated yet impressed, and for the first time in years, I saw him humbled. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and I, for the first time, fully enjoyed the satisfaction of silent, unshakable triumph. Tom Henderson's eyes were still wide, scanning the office as if trying to piece together a puzzle he had long refused to imagine. I leaned back in my chair, letting the hum of the city outside my floor-to-ceiling windows fill the space, a quiet reminder of the life I had built. I felt calm, collected, untouchable. For the first time, I realized just how much control I held, not through aggression but through the power of my own independence. "I'm willing to help," I said, my tone even measured. "But on my terms." I let that sink in. The man who once dictated my worth was now listening to conditions he couldn't argue with. He swallowed hard, and I continued. "First," I said, "you need to acknowledge that undervaluing people only limits yourself. Recognize talent, not just credentials. It's not optional, it's essential if you want to remain relevant." His throat moved, a silent nod forming, but I didn't stop there. "Second," I added, "if you work with me, or anyone I recommend, you do it with respect. No more dismissive comments, no more micromanaging, no more underestimating people based on age, gender, or appearances. That behavior will end today." I watched him absorb the weight of those words, realizing that the rules had changed. "Third," I said, leaning forward slightly, my hands resting on the edge of the glass desk, "take responsibility for your personal growth. Read, learn, and adapt. Stay stuck in the past, and you'll be left behind." I could see the mixture of guilt and awe on his face. I wasn't punishing him. I was offering a chance to change, to meet the world as it really was. Finally, I added the most important condition. And remember, this is about more than money. It's about respect, self-awareness, and integrity. If you can't meet these standards, you won't be part of my circle. Simple as that. The silence stretched for a moment, and then he nodded, fully aware that he had no choice but to accept. The power shift was complete, not through revenge, but through deliberate, measured control. I was in the driver's seat, yet I offered an opportunity for redemption. Compassion and firmness hand in hand. I could see the transformation beginning, subtle but unmistakable. He straightened his posture, exhaled, and for the first time, truly listened to the woman he had once dismissed. I felt a small, satisfied smile tug at my lips. Change was possible, but only if it came on my terms. This was the culmination of everything I had built: financial independence, self-respect, and the ability to shape the future of those who had once doubted me. I was no longer the timid employee, the one who asked for a raise and got denied. I was a woman who knew her worth and would never let anyone define it again. And in this moment, watching him absorb the consequences of his past, I felt a sense of quiet triumph that was infinitely more powerful than any paycheck or title. Weeks passed after that meeting, and I began to notice subtle changes, not just in Tom Henderson but in myself. He started approaching his team differently, genuinely listening, acknowledging talent where he had once ignored it. It was strange and gratifying, watching someone evolve because of the boundaries I had set. But the greater reward was the quiet reflection of my own journey. I often found myself back at my desk, the city sprawling below, and I would pull out that little worn notebook from my grandmother. The pages were filled with sketches, projections, and reminders of every step I had taken. Every challenge, every sleepless night, Every minor victory that had built the foundation of my independence now looked like a roadmap of resilience. The notebook was no longer just a guide, it was a symbol of transformation, the bridge between who I was and who I had become. I thought of the younger version of me, timid, uncertain, and underestimated. She would never have believed she could reach this place, financially secure, respected, and entirely in control of her life. And yet here I was. I had turned hurt into strategy, rejection into motivation, and silence into a quiet power that needed no validation. The people who had once doubted me, the boss, colleagues, even casual acquaintances, were beginning to recognize that the woman they underestimated had always been capable of greatness. It wasn't arrogance, it was confidence born from proof, earned through years of dedication and quiet, deliberate effort. I closed the notebook and looked out the window, sunlight catching the edges of the skyline, glinting like a promise kept. The city felt softer now, more like a stage on which I had claimed my role, rather than a battlefield. The woman I had become was strong, independent, and at peace. And I spoke to myself in that calm, steady voice that had grown over years of self-discovery. I may have once asked for a raise, but now I set the terms. I define my worth, my path, and my life. The words rolled off my tongue, smooth, resolute, and yet warm. They weren't just for me. They were the echo of every struggle, every lesson, and every triumph that had shaped me. The journey had been long, but the destination was clear. Strength, independence, and grace, unshaken by anyone else's measure of my worth.